Today, I'm going to share with you what, in my opinion, as a lifetime entrepreneur, might just be the best business book I've ever read. Now, it's not my book, Nomad Capitalist, but I believe if you apply the tactics in my favorite business book, you'll have a lot more money to do the stuff we talk about in Nomad Capitalist. I'm going to share the book with you right now. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you're new to the channel, we normally talk about legal offshore tax strategies for entrepreneurs to keep more of their own money. You can learn more about that at nomadcapitalist.com. And today, I want to introduce you, though, to probably the best business book that I've read, if not ever, in a long time. It's called Entreleadership. It's written by Dave Ramsey. If you're in the United States, you may know him as the host of a radio show talking about personal finance, getting out of debt, New York Times best-selling book. Now, I have known about Dave Ramsey for a long time. I used to work in the broadcasting industry, focusing on talk radio. He's really built his radio show over the years to become a tremendous success. Shame on me, back when I was 19, 20 years old in the radio business, kind of smirking at Dave Ramsey for being on these little small radio stations. Now he's a huge success all over the country, in the US. And I was lucky enough to have the personal finance principles he talks about taught to me as a kid. But this book is different. Entreleadership, what I really like about it is, while it certainly does have a bit of an American perspective, which I'll talk about in a moment, it is a great blending of, as he calls it, entrepreneurship and leadership. And why I really like this is, I've been a lifetime entrepreneur. I left university. I didn't have any connections. I got $0 in loans. I raised $0 in funding. I got $0 in gifts from my family. I started out with nothing. A phone. I picked up a phone and I made calls, made sales, and I grew the business. And I've gone on to run a number of different other businesses. And so, I am, I think, kind of the classic old school entrepreneur where it's just roll your sleeves up, get out there and do it. Well, little did I know until I started listening to his show about a year and a half ago that Dave Ramsey has gone on to use his radio show to build a company that does a couple $100 million a year in revenue and has almost 1,000 employees. So this is a pretty serious business, right? We recently got up to about 24 people at Nomad Capitalist. 1,000 people to me sounds, insane. It's a great achievement. And so how do you get from 24 to 1,000? I started to think it wasn't just about having entrepreneur roll up your sleeves strategies. I do believe that hard work generally gets you across the finish line. If you outwork everybody, you will be better than almost everybody. But how do you get to that great next level? It really comes down to what he says in the book is all about leadership. And so that leadership perspective is very interesting because people like myself, maybe some of you, who have been entrepreneurs their entire lives, who have not really held regular jobs, who have not been in the corporate world, the institutional world, who haven't worked in government or a bank or anything like that, we really push away from the bureaucracy of that other world, of the endless meetings, of the endless form filling, of just it's not my responsibility. If you're an entrepreneur, everything's your responsibility. You don't have time to point the finger at Susie in accounting or John down the hall. It's on you, right? But I do think, as I read the book, he makes a great point that you want to take some of the best points of that corporate style leadership and really implement it in your business. One of the things that I found when I started Nomad Capitalist, which certainly has some libertarian and certainly very entrepreneurial undertones to it, was, we had the most basic contracts you could ever possibly imagine. It was like on the back of a Domino's pizza napkin, right? And, most of the time it went pretty well. Occasionally, you'd get into trouble with that and someone would cause you a problem. And so what I started to realize over the years of growing this business, not to 1,000 employees, but certainly to millions of dollars, was you do need some of the best elements of corporate and institutional thinking in terms of having good contracts, in terms of having good policies and procedures, having handbooks, having guidelines for things, right? And as we've grown from 2 or 3 or 4 of us to now a couple dozen of us, I've seen just how important that is. So let's talk about the book. The overriding principle that he talks about that I really like is he talks about the golden rule. So whether you're hiring, whether you're dealing with vendors, whether you're dealing with customers, you want to do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. There's definitely an ethical tone in the book. Dave Ramsey, if you haven't heard his show, he's an evangelical Christian. So there's certainly a morality tone to it. I did not find it overbearing. I happen to think that capitalism works best when people are ethical. If everyone was out screwing everybody, it wouldn't work. So he talks about the golden rule. That's his perspective. What he also talks about, one of the earliest things in the book, is the power of making decisions. This applies to people who are doing the stuff we talk about here at Nomad Capitalist as well. If you want to move overseas, dramatically reduce your taxes, set up a foreign company, that kind of thing, get a second passport. You have to make decisions even when you don't have all of the information. You have to make decisions in spite of fear. And so normally I read business books or I listen to audiobooks and I kind of think, hey, this is 6 or 7 or 8 hours and there's some good points, but not really enough, right? This book, there are a lot of anecdotes, but I felt that, as an entrepreneur, they all spoke to me. You ever listen to something or read something, we're like, oh yeah, that's me. Oh yeah, like that too. And you really just feel it. That was why I liked the book, because I kept hearing these stories. It's like, oh yeah, I've done that. And I really just was able to see myself and some of my own mistakes in the stories that he was telling. Now, I'm a pretty hard charging guy. I just go out and I do stuff, figure it out later kind of thing. But he really talks about making decisions in spite of fear. He also talks about sometimes setting fake deadlines for yourself when one doesn't exist. I thought that was relevant for folks, again, who are looking to go offshore, get a second passport, who think they have all the time in the world. If you want to be successful, have a fake deadline. And so a lot of this is based around, how to not be a weak leader. One of the best parts in here, however, was, how do you become a leader? And how do you do that through building your company, building your team? So there's a whole bunch of sections in here about what is probably the hardest thing for any entrepreneur to do, which is hiring, keeping good team members, culling the herd when necessary. There's a lot of great actionable advice. One of his strategies is, incentivize people as much as possible. Now, this is where it perhaps gets a little bit American. For myself, we have a team that's largely in Asia and Eastern Europe. I do think that while human beings are human beings, people are incentivized a little bit differently. So you have to take your local culture into account. If you're like me and you want to hire people in other places, there are some countries where more money is not what they want. What they want is pride, or what they want is more free time. Obviously in the United States, a lot of people, and I imagine a lot of people working for Dave Ramsey, they're looking to get ahead. It's a great thing about the United States, but it's not how it works everywhere. Of course, if you're hiring other places, you're probably paying a lot less than you would in the United States as well, and you can still find some very good people. But he has a whole section on how to hire and keep and fire people. And what I like about it is the dichotomy of how to motivate and inspire and keep and promote the great team members, how to put people on commission, how to do potentially profit sharing with the entire team so that everyone feels a piece of the pie, not just the sales team, for example, who traditionally gets commission. He says, I would put my receptionist on straight commission if I could, because I want everyone to be motivated and I want them to be rewarded. He also talks about things that you should get rid of people for. So if they're gossipy, that's I think his number one thing. If someone's a gossiper, they gotta go. People who are disagreeable. He really talks about what I think is a great old school business philosophy of, if people aren't with you, if they're not part of the team, they're basically stealing from you, right? You don't want them on your team. You have to get rid of them, as he says, get rid of them in Jesus' name. And there's a whole section on how to do that. I won't do it justice. He's got a lot more experience than I do over the last 30 years. But for, I think, the average entrepreneur, this is probably the thing that we know the least about in many cases. Maybe if you come from an HR background, if you worked in a big organization, you know something about this. But for me, one of the hardest things for me, getting into business was realizing most people don't think the way that I think. Most people obviously don't want to put in all the hours, nor should they if they're the employee. But most people don't have the same motivation. The same things don't cross their mind. They may not be as proactive. You can train some of those things. He talks about that. But if you're an entrepreneur and you've been living in an entrepreneurial bubble, you may tend to think that when you start hiring people are going to have those basic same understandings. And that's really not the case in many cases. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just the reality. And so there's some great sections in here. And what I love is, he's very proud of being rated the best place to work for, I think it was about 10 years in a row in where he is in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I think having pride in keeping good people and also setting clear boundaries, that's actually a a term that I really got into reading his book and listening to his show is setting boundaries. What are the boundaries with your team members? What are the boundaries with your customers, right? You want to serve people, you want to lift people up, but at some point, people can't just take advantage of you. And so he really talks about that, and I think that's a great approach. What he also talks about is the importance of salesmanship and how to go about building your company through sales. This is one thing I've talked about a little bit in recent years where, the hashtag entrepreneur trend, in my opinion, has gotten to where you have a lot of people who think that they're entrepreneurs and think that they're in business, but they hate the idea of selling. Selling is almost vulgar to them. And he's a guy who, like me, went around mowing lawns as a kid and was always able to sell stuff to get by. Talks about the power, if you're not a naturally great salesman, of how to apply principles of salesmanship in your business so that you can continue to grow your revenue. Because if you're afraid of selling, that's a great point he makes. If you're afraid of selling, your business is not going to grow. You're not going to be able to provide your service to more people who need to hear about it, who want it. You're not going to have the resources to reinvest in marketing and getting the word out. You're not going to be able to help more people join your team and help change their lives, being a part of something that gives them purpose. That's another thing he talks about, giving people purpose and having a clear vision, having a clear message. But salesmanship was a really important part of the book as well. And I think he does it in a way that's very tasteful, very ethical, and I think that's a great section as well. Probably my favorite thing about the book was just the vibe that, if you open up to the front page and you look at the praise for the book, you certainly have some religious figures and you have some U.S. political figures. You may or may not be into that. But you've got, the founder of Chick-fil-A, the big fast food chain. You've got John Maxwell. You've got Glenn Beck. You've got Seth Godin, people who started big businesses who are actually making an impact. That was, to me, kind of the vibe of the book. And when I listen to Dave Ramsey's show occasionally, that is the vibe that I get from him is, you want to learn from people who've been actually practicing this for a long time. It's the same thing that I tell people with what we do at Nomad Capitalist, right? I mean, I've been out there for 12, 13 years, traveling all around the world, trying to figure out what actually works in the world of second passports and offshore tax and banking and investments. And I can tell you, what you think works often doesn't work in reality. And so he's got a lot of insights in here from people who've been really walking the walk. A guy who built a fast food chain from nothing to a huge brand, at least in the United States. And so, for me, I find a lot of business books to be rather theoretical. One of the things that happened to me a number of years ago when I started traveling substantially through Asia was I would meet a lot of young, new entrepreneurs who would ask me, hey, did you read that business book or did you read this business book? And I was kind of embarrassed that a lot of the time I hadn't read the books that they were talking about. As a kid, I had read business books, but they were more biographical, aspirational. But ever since I actually started a business, I hadn't read that many business books. I've really focused a lot more on personal development books. I'll read books related to what we do at Nomad Capitalist. I'll read stuff about the geography of different places, the politics of different places, why certain countries succeed. That's the kind of stuff that I read. I don't read so much about business. And again, the few business books that I've read comparatively, I was never that thrilled by because I felt they were light on information. And really, what I think if you're going to read a business book, you want to read something from someone who's actually done it. The challenge that I saw with everyone who read the books, nothing wrong with reading books and nothing wrong with many of those entrepreneurs, but the challenge that I've seen is sometimes people want to read too many books. And this was a book to me that was the antidote to reading too many books. It was just like so much information that I remember walking around listening to the audiobook in Mexico City and I'm like, I need to get a pen and start writing this down. There's so much information in here versus just this is kind of feel good. This is kind of getting you introduced to business. If you have a successful business already, if you have the seedling and you want to grow it into a great oak tree, I think this is a book that will help you get to that next level. Again, through hiring, through salesmanship, through having a proper mission and making sure you're on a clear path. So Entreleadership, Dave Ramsey, perhaps the best business book that I've read, 20 years, I guess now closer to 30 years of practical business wisdom. I'm a practical guy. I like that part. I don't really want to bathe in theory. Theory works for a small part. As Dave Ramsey would say, 80% of this is just action. It's behavior. 20% is the strategy. And so I think that this book speaks to that. If you've read the book, leave a comment. What was your opinion on it? If you think there's a business book that's better out there, leave a comment below. Perhaps we will review your favorite business book as well. I want to hear from you. What do you think about this book, and what do you think about other business books that perhaps we should consider? How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.